Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us for a great discussion on equity and inclusion and sustainability in the workplace. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to just go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Nicole Sticka and I'm the Vice President of Energy Services with the Greater Cleveland Partnership, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. We want to make sure today's presentation is extremely valuable for you, so we ask that you submit all questions by clicking on the question button in the control panel and typing your question. We welcome questions throughout, so please do submit your questions during the presentation. In addition, today's webinar will also be recorded. I'm so thrilled today because I am joined by two amazing women, Melanie Larkins, who's the Product Sustainability Leader at Tarkett USA, and Monica Jackson, Vice President of Global Inclusion and Diversity at Eaton Corporation. So just a little background and some context as we get into today's webinar. I personally have been in the sustainability field now for half my career, and the last several years I've been more intentional about weaving in equity and inclusion into the work that we do. My work is really focused in the energy space and influencing the way businesses use energy, manage it, and measure it. But to have building owners consider the holistic view and how they can incorporate sustainable business practices has been more intentional over the last several years. Sustainability is a broad concept. At its most simple definition, it's something that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, that's a mouthful, and we'll get into more of what that means. But as we continue to see huge economic and population growth alongside a devastating environmental threat, the need for more sustainable business practices are becoming more important to those entering the workforce. And equity is an essential component of sustainability that's been viewed as one of the three pillars of sustainability, alongside the environment and economy, and as a key consideration to be made in decisions affecting both the environment and the economy. It's part of our discussion with building owners all the time when they're considering renovations and expansion or new construction. So where does D&I fit into all of this? Well, D&I by its nature deals with human rights. Sustainability efforts, especially when it comes to climate change, also deals with human rights. That's the link. And when it comes to incorporating these two initiatives into a business model, they utilize the same methods. As a rule, and something that we share with our businesses is implementing sustainable business practices includes incorporating principles of sustainability into every business decision, offering green alternatives to products or services, and committing to environmental business operations and principles. That said, to be truly sustainable, a business shouldn't just focus on the environmental resources, it should also commit to sustaining its social resources too. And these include the employees, customers, and reputation, because longevity is key in this respect, and sustainability is about building something for the greater good. And today's workforce definitely wants that progressive culture, for their employer to lead by example, to be open, transparent, collaborative, and even have a greater purpose. That they're defined, that the company has defined sustainable business practices that offer social, environmental, and financial benefits to create that workforce for tomorrow that's progressive and inclusive and allows the employer to adopt sustainable business practices with mindful intent. But we know all organizations don't have this figured out yet, and some are still fumbling through what this means and looks like. We all look for best practices, of course, and some magic wand that will help us incorporate all of these overnight. But we know that that's not necessarily the case, because it's not just a cut and paste, and it's not a one-size-fits-all for diversity, inclusion, and sustainability. And quite frankly, that's the journey that the Greater Cleveland Partnership has been on for the last several years too. When we took a deep dive into our own results from the diversity and inclusion assessment, we discovered areas of opportunity. I'm sure many of you did too. And that brought about a great dialogue and the formation for our own internal DEI Council and Sustainability team. However, GCP is a service-based organization. We're not like Tarkett or Eaton, where we make something. We don't make widgets and have influence in the design or sourcing of materials, but our influence is on people. The who, the what, where, when, and how, to provide the education and raise awareness, to provide connections and access to resources so that our member companies and businesses broadly incorporate equity and inclusion and sustainable business practices into their operations. So GCP is still defining our sustainability goals and objectives and making sure that those align with our diversity and inclusion goals and objectives. But we know the common denominator is, however, our people, our staff, members, visitors, suppliers, vendors, partners. They're all the glue, the social glue to our ESG. And GCP continues to create a workplace environment that's progressive while continuing to adopt these practices. So we're engaging staff, our board, our members, empowering those voices and shifting a culture. And so today we're going to hear more from Eaton and Tarkett about how they are intersecting diversity and inclusion and sustainability. So with that, I'd like to welcome first Melanie Larkins, Product Sustainability Leader with Tarkett, to get us started. So Melanie, tell me more about your company's sustainability strategy and how that has intersected with diversity and inclusion. Where did it start? How did it start? Was there a specific reason or impetus? And tell me more about how it's evolved over time.
Thanks, Nicole. So I'm gonna just share my screen here. I'm really glad to be here first. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I think this is a really great topic and one that's coming to more of the forefront. Especially I think as you said, sustainability and diversity are at the core about human rights, and it's about equity, it's about inclusion, it's about having, having people, environments be taken care of over time. And it's looking forward into the future, I think, for both diversity and sustainability, not just for ourselves for today, but for future generations. That's why diversity and inclusion is important. It's just not just for us, but it's also for our kids and for their kids and on and on. And I think it's the same for sustainability. So at Tarkett, can you see my screen?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't see you. So at Tarkett, I'm just going to show you our website here because I think it shows a good overview of what we're doing. So our motto, our kind of main campaign is about doing good together. So you can see here, this wraps up everything that we do when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to corporate corporate social responsibility, CSR. For us, this doing good together is in these 5 pillars of designing for life, which is all about the eco design of our materials, cradle to cradle, other certifications that we have, the chemicals that go into our products like phthalates, we do not use those in our products, and other chemicals of concern. So it's about designing with our customers in mind, with people in mind. Like we were saying before, from a human rights perspective, from a people's perspective, this is super important. We're designing people-friendly spaces or being a part of that people-friendly space design so that more people are able to live happy, healthy, well lives in the building spaces where our products are being used. Another place where this comes into the picture is in closing the loop or circular economy. So you can see here, this is really what we're trying to be a part of, is circular economy. So we're not just producing products to then throw them away or have them be thrown away. The idea is that we are putting these products into a circular economy so that they can be used over and over and over again. So we're designing with the end of life in mind. And you can see here, we're transforming into new resources, using eco design and manufacturing, then going into making our flooring with recycled and recyclable content. Finally, those products are installed and used. Then they're collected. They can be brought back to our facilities. We can recycle them in some cases, or transform them again into new resources. Sometimes they're also put into other industries. For example, I'll say also when we're taking them from other industries, one of the cool stories that I like to tell is about Ethos. So our Ethos product, we're taking, when cars are in car crashes and you have that broken windshield, we're able to take the PVB, which is part of that windshield, break it down, and then build that into a new flooring, into backing for our soft surface products. So that's keeping this resource not from a floor, but it's coming from a different industry, but keeping it in this loop and being able to use that over and over and over again. In doing so, it's helping to reduce carbon emissions from production. We're using recycled content, so that's also helping to reduce carbon emissions. And overall, that's helping with climate change, which, as we said before, is definitely a human rights issue. Overwhelmingly, the people that are most adversely affected by climate change are people in diverse or minority populations. So for me, that's really important, not just for myself being in the US, but for people globally, that these already marginalized communities are often the ones that are being hit hardest by climate change. One of the other things we do, we're part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So this is part of our driving collaboration pillar. We partner with a lot of organizations locally and globally, like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But we also do things like partnering with Habitat for Humanity, where we've been able to put our flooring into housing for people in need. Or we might find just different organizations that need flooring for different projects, and we're able to help out with our local communities. In addition, part of the thing that we're doing for our climate change is being part of the UN Global Compact. This is really important. We're a signatory of this compact, which covers the themes of human rights, working conditions, the fight against corruption, and respect for the environment. So for us, this is focusing on sourcing healthy materials, ensuring our suppliers are conducting their business ethically, also taking into account human rights, fair treatment, safe and healthy workplace, and also ensuring that our suppliers are managing their operations with environmental responsibility. One of the other things that I think is really cool that we do is called Tarkett Cares. So this is our volunteering program. We will go out and support our local communities in days of service. This could be something like doing a walk in support of a local charitable organization. This could be doing a donation drive. This could be doing a Habitat for Humanity build or something else, a tree planting, or just other things that are in our community that really help to really help people. And then the last pillar of this Doing Good Together campaign for us is diversity and inclusion. It's not last because it's less important by any means. It's just the other pillar that we have. So one of the very important targets that we have is that 30% of our managers and executives will be women by 2025. And this is a global group ambition. So this is not just for North America, this is Tarkett as a whole. This is really important for gender diversity, inclusion, and also spills over into other areas of diversity and inclusion for us. So we have the aim to achieve it. We're taking actions to achieve that, especially by promoting women within the organization, especially with our recruiting practices. And part of that recruitment also involves training our recruiters to make sure that they are aware of things like unconscious bias, so that they're understanding the ways to word job announcements, the ways to attract certain talent that we want to have in our organization to make sure that we are as diverse as we can be. And this is not just for women, it's for other groups as well. So it's one of our guiding principles for our management, for our group as a whole, really important to Tarkett. And this is something that we've been involved in for at least the last couple of decades as a group and in North America as a whole. So trying to think, I had one other thing I wanted to show. Let's see. Hold on. Oh, 1 minute. I'll look at our key figures. So we have a CSR report that we put out every year. And this is just a kind of idea of what we're doing in the sustainability space. So we've recycled 127,000 tons of material just in 2020. 13% of our raw materials are recycled materials. And then our CO2, our carbon emissions have been down by 27%. That's looking at 2019 compared to the previous year, or 2020 compared to the previous year, compared to our baseline year, 2010. So this is huge for us, especially in the sustainability space. One of the new things that we have just launched is ERGs that are focused on diversity. So this is one of the newer, I would say the newer channels that we're going through to address diversity and inclusion is through employee resource groups, if you don't know what those are. I think these are really cool. These are a great way to bring people together around different topics of diversity. So we have one called EPIC, and this is, it's for African American employees or people that are interested in that culture. And we're doing things like bringing in leadership to talk about unconscious bias. We're bringing in HR to talk about microaggressions. We participated in a summit with Penn State. I think that was 2 weeks ago, to talk about this very topic of where sustainability and diversity and inclusion intersect. So we're doing more active things to help guide the organization, to help integrate more of the things that we have on a policy level on the day-to-day. So it's making sure that employees are involved and a part of the process, that leadership is also involved, that HR is also involved, so that we're all working together, bringing ideas to the table, understanding the problems that we may have in our organization, for individuals as well as for the larger group, to understand how we can address those, how we can move forward, understand what we're doing well, understand where we need to improve. And also, it's just kind of been nice to have a place where people can come to talk and to voice their concerns and to be able to be heard. And it's like a nice space where people can have the floor to bring things to the table. One of the cool stories that I think that's come out of this group recently is, in design. Design is not necessarily a very diverse space when it comes to ethnic, cultural, racial diversity. So we had a student of color that was wanting to drop out of her design program, and one of the people in our ERG was friends with her professor, and the professor brought this issue to our employee and asked her if she would be willing to speak to the student, because she really didn't want her to drop out of this program. And she was like ready to quit. She's like, why am I even doing this? I don't see people that look like me on the websites of these companies. I don't understand why I would keep doing this. And so so we've all kind of banded together to develop a program to help her, help her understand that this is a valid path for her, that she can absolutely have success in the design field. She is not alone. There are other people like her who are in this field. Give her resources that she might need, help her with training, just to help her to have a support system. And I think that's really the thing that ERGs give us, is support. And when we're dealing with sustainability as well as diversity and inclusion, the support structure is really important for giving employees that support to be able to feel safe, to feel comfortable in the workplace first, but also to feel safe and comfortable to voice any issues or concerns that are happening, and to know that they are still a part of the organization, that they are still valid, that they still have purpose and matter, and will not be shunned or treated badly because of voicing a concern. So I think that's been a really cool story, that we've been able to kind of help this one student, which to me speaks volumes. It's one student today, but she will help someone else down the line, and she will also talk to her friends about her path, and maybe bring in more of her friends into the design path. So for me, that was a really cool success story. So yeah, ERGs is one space, I think, also where sustainability and diversity and inclusion intersect. Like I said, we have Tarkett Cares, which is a bit of an employee resource group as well. So that's bringing in people together from groups that may never otherwise collaborate into doing something that's great for other people. So for us, like I said, this is a really important intersection for us: diversity and inclusion, sustainability, all working together as part of our CSR program. For me, it's been an important part of my path. I've been in sustainability for the last like 20 plus years now, since 2000. Yeah, 2000. Wow, time flies. And then I've been in diversity as well for quite a long time, and it's very cool to see these kind of separate pillars historically coming together more intentionally within these larger organizations. I think in the past, these pillars have come together when it's a real kind of direct human rights issue of you have some like dams that are being constructed that will flood people out and maybe take water from another population, which is devastating on either side. So that is where I think sustainability and diversity and human rights have been very enmeshed from the beginning. And now it's coming more to that level in the corporate space, which I find really exciting. And yeah, so this is what we're doing for Tarkett as a whole. That's what I have for now. So Nicole, I will take it back to you.
Melanie, that was fantastic. And I love that example of the student, especially because like you said, what she learns and hopefully is inspired by, she's going to continue to pay it forward and hopefully encourage more students to enter the field. We had a question come in and we'll pose it to both of you, and Monica, we'll jump over to you now to hear more about Eaton Corporation's sustainability and diversity practices and initiatives. But the question that just came in that I'd love to have you address as part of your remarks is, how can a company who is new to diversity and inclusion begin to incorporate these type of practices? The question also includes that they would love to offer classes on unconscious bias and microaggressions in business. And I know that our own Greater Cleveland Partnership Equity and Inclusion team offers many best practices within our library and webinars and so forth. But if both of you could also address that in your remarks, that would be fantastic. So Monica, please welcome everyone, or Monica, and let's get us started in Eaton.
Okay, great. I am going to start with a quick video. Let's see. I think I need the share rights. Okay, awesome. And it's just to give you a feel and a brief understanding of maybe who Eaton is. So I'll start there. Okay. Okay, great. So while I'm going to pull up a presentation that I'll just use a few slides to talk us through, and again, welcome comments and questions, and I will respond to the question too that was just posed in the remarks here as well. So as I mentioned, I wanted to just show that video to give you all a sense of who we are at Eaton. I know I joined Eaton about a year ago, and honestly, was not aware of who we were probably until 2 years before that. We are not a consumer-facing company, so therein lies, some of that lack of brand awareness. But as we start to kind of walk through a little bit about the topic at hand here in terms of, where I&D meets sustainability, it's important to kind of set the stage for you all to just ground you in terms of who we are. As you can see for this slide, we are headquartered in Dublin, Ireland, and our U.S. headquarters is here in Cleveland, Ohio. We have about 92,000 employees globally, And one thing I will highlight is we are super proud to speak to the diversity of our board of directors, being 2/3 of them are women or U.S. minorities, as well as our senior leadership team. We have 54% of our senior leadership team in the U.S. that are U.S. minorities as well, and that is relevant to our conversation too today. And I think it's been mentioned, a lot of this is about the focus, intentionality, the integration in terms of your practices, and making it part of what we do. It's a journey. By no means have we figured it all out, but clearly it's truly important that we have practices in place and make this part of what we do every day. So I'll move a little bit here to the next slide, just to kind of ground us more. When we say, who are we at Eaton? We are an intelligent power management company. That's how we describe ourselves. And so when you start to think about what that means in terms of sustainability, and you look at the trends in terms of energy transition from fossil fuels to renewables, you look at climate change, you think about the growth in electrification. A lot of our products too are online. So you have technology that really is enabling us to optimize our power. You have a huge demand for power. So again, energy transition is huge. So all of that speaks to the importance of what we do in a sustainable manner, how important it is to our customers, to our suppliers, to the environment, right, as was mentioned earlier, and clearly to investors as well. So this is where you start to really find the linkages in terms of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and why it's important, and how it will dovetail as well with I&D, inclusion and diversity. So next, I'll just show a slide a little bit that dives into sustainability, and we have 2030 targets for sustainability in terms of carbon emissions, really looking at our communities, building and developing more sustainable communities, and how that plays into that. As mentioned earlier, very similar. So when you think about sustainability and our huge platform, and I&D is integrated in that. When I explored joining Eaton, I will tell you from an HR professional standpoint, I was impressed with the integration of inclusion and diversity as I was researching the company. As mentioned earlier, we too have an annual sustainability report that is produced, and inclusion and diversity is integrated in that. It's embedded. Right? It's not a separate item. So when we say our commitment to the external community and social matters, it's all part and parcel of that commitment. So this integration happened, I will say, well before me, but I was impressed that the thinking was progressive in terms of that, recognizing that employees matter, their health and wellness matters, the community matters, fair practices matter. And when you think about employee practices, maybe if we're super honest about what gets in the way of some of this this work towards equity, some of this really is about historical practices that have continued to exist, and how do you really start to unpack those and mitigate where bias, et cetera, comes in. Nicole mentioned earlier that sustainability is really about something that meets the needs of the present without compromising the future. And I thought that was such a great point. Right? We exist today, but we have to be forward thinking in terms of what do we do today and what does that mean in years to come. So that's a little bit about my take on sustainability in this report, on this page here on this slide. So let me move forward a little here. In terms of now the I&D portion, and again, how is it integrated? So as a company, we have our vision as Eaton, right? Improving the quality of life of the environment through the use of power management. I talked about an intelligent power management system, but we also, look at that as how do we develop our employees, our customers, how do we deliver for our shareholders and the community? So those are those key points. So when you think about inclusion and diversity and really weaving, into all of those elements, they just land there very nicely. And on the far right, top right, our goals as a company, we have established aspirational goals. They're declared, they're stated, they're shared publicly. And one of those is to be a model of inclusion and diversity in our industry. Again, it's integrated. It's part of the focus of our company. And how do we do that? We do that through our leadership attributes and our expectations for our leaders, which speaks to being ethical, right? That's just as much part of our sustainability effort and focus. Ethical. Investors expect that, right, of us. Being efficient is also important as we think about, again, the future state, what we do today, and how does it impact the future. Move to the next slide here and just focus a little bit on, as probably many of you, when we think about inclusion and diversity, it starts at the top with our leaders. And, regardless of what company I've been in, from an HR leader standpoint, and even in the roles of inclusion and diversity, this commitment to inclusion and diversity, sustainability, all of that starts at the top. And so as you will see, our CEO speaks very clearly about the importance of I&D at Eaton. It is about business results. It's about fulfilling our vision, which is, again, closely linked to our sustainability. The one thing I will say as well is when I think about our human capital and talent management practices, that in and of itself is also included in our sustainability goals. We talk about employee engagement and your annual employee engagement surveys and post surveys, and what we expect to see in terms of those scores, inclusion index. We talk about our talent management practices, and then what do those practices look like? What is the standard work, again, of those practices, so that we can ensure consistency in terms of the execution and the application. So when I think about how it's integrated, it is so closely linked at this point, and we still have work to do, right, to continue that. But I think by having, an Eaton business system that we can tie and link our processes to and scale them in a way that we say, this is how we do the work. Right? It's not optional, but this is how we approach our hiring and our assessment and our selection processes. This is how we approach our promotion processes. We also have employee resource groups, as was mentioned earlier, and we have a maturity model that's part of our Eaton business system that will actually allow and assist our leaders in terms of where are they on that spectrum in terms of increasing their maturity. So it gives them a roadmap to effectiveness, if you will. So again, that's how it's all linked into sustainability and our Eaton business system, which allows for scalability, repeatability, etc. And then I have, I think, one final slide to show, maybe one more. The last thing I'll say is, again, we've been very thoughtful prior to my arrival, as I would say, in thinking about what that model looks like for I&D at Eaton in order to have, this governance around it. So again, we tie our inclusion and diversity focus to our company vision, the aspirational goal to be a model of inclusion and diversity, and then what's our promise to our employees, and even externally, when you say giving the stakeholders confidence that they are engaging with a sustainable, socially responsible company. Our model is executed through our Global Inclusion Council that's chaired by our CEO and his leadership team, and then within each region, North America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, and South America, we have regional inclusion councils that allow for the local nuances and what's required to bring, the vision to bear there locally. And then we also say, look, every leader, manager, and every employee, you are part of this journey to advance inclusion and diversity. So it's not just about, the leadership, as I mentioned, being hugely important in terms of, really having the commitment and the accountability, but it funnels and, passes down to all employees within the organization. So I will land and leave you with just a slide that kind of summarizes it, and then I'll speak to the earlier question about how can a company start. It's critically important for us in terms of being a socially responsible and sustainable company as perceived by potential employees, stakeholders, et cetera, to ensure that inclusion, diversity, and equity is integrated and embedded in everything we do. So in response to the question that was presented right before, how can an organization that's starting kind of incorporate inclusion, diversity, equity into what they're doing? Hopefully I phrased that accurately. What I always say is start with your why. Why are you doing this? What are you solving for? And then that will guide you in terms of where you need to focus, what your priority may be. It's super easy to say, hey, let's just do unconscious bias training. Okay, but what does that solve for? So I think you just have to be very, very clear to start with your why, like problem solving and anything, and then, identify the sustainable solutions that will address whatever that gap is, whatever you're solving for. Just be careful not to just, throw things at the wall and hope they will stick. That has been, I think, a part of what has transpired in this space for many, many years. A lot of activity with not significant impact or sustainable solutions, if you will. So I will stop there and turn it back over.
Monica, that was fantastic. Thank you. So a question for both Monica and Melanie is, you're both global corporations. You've got footprints across the globe. How have those global perspectives played into the values, the goals, objectives of your companies? And also, from a global perspective, how have racial and sustainability issues over the last several years played into your strategic plans? Who wants to start? I know that's a loaded question.
Okay, Melanie, you want to start?
I'll jump in. So this is something we had discussed before. It's really interesting. So if you don't know, Tarkett is based in Paris, France. And kind of our, I would say, de facto North American headquarters is in Solon, Ohio. And so we are a global organization, which I think changes things a bit. In North America, we tend to get very focused on North America. And as a global organization, we have to consider, obviously, the globe. So one of the interesting things is when I'm looking at most of Europe, especially France, where we are headquartered, we are not allowed to ask certain information of our employees. So where in the US, it is very common to have on a job application or many different kinds of applications, even your driver's license, your race. And you can select and you can usually opt out of that question, but it's oftentimes illegal for a company to actually ask that of an applicant in a lot of other countries, especially in Europe. So our diversity and inclusion strategy for our group has to be a bit different than what we can do in North America, for example. So we're here, we might be able to focus on recruiting at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, or different groups like Asian American groups or Indigenous groups, or, where we can maybe go after things in those terms. We can't necessarily do that as a group because of the legal issues, because of cultural differences. So our group strategy has to be a bit different than our North American one. So for me, that's always really interesting to see the differences, to see how we have to approach things differently. I think that's really the most interesting difference. That's why the gender target is our main target as a group when it comes to diversity and inclusion, where we have other, let's say, maybe less formal targets or different targets when it comes to our region or North America as a whole. So yeah, that's where I would kind of end with that.
Yeah, a few thoughts. I totally agree with everything that Melanie said. It applies when you think about it. And so when we look at our regional inclusion councils, that's exactly why we have those, because they are in market, they are local, they understand the practices and the cultural norms and traditions, et cetera, and how to advance I&D, more so if we were trying to do it all from here. Because, you know, to Melanie's point, you know, when you're kind of sitting in a location, it's human nature for all of us to think with that in mind. So we have to be intentionally inclusive and ask for input and seek perspective in that regards. But one thing I will say though is the notion of belonging and inclusion is universal. So, you know, you have practices and laws and cultures and traditions, right, that are regional and maybe country specific and maybe even more granular than that. But if we step back and think about as humans, you know, our desire to belong is universal, regardless of where we sit. Our desire to connect with others and be a part of something bigger, part of something that's important, that, you know, company that's ethical and sustainable and all of that. Our individual desire to be valued and celebrated for our unique differences, it's universal regardless of where we are. So that's where I think the inclusion piece comes in. So you have the diversity around, you know, representation and what can we do maybe, and who are we seeking to advance and increase the representation. But this inclusion piece is just who we are as humans and what we all desire. So that's the perspective I would bring.
Thank you both. We may have some small businesses on our webinar today that don't necessarily have a dedicated sustainability manager or someone that's focused just on diversity and inclusion. What can a small business do to begin their journey and incorporate these type of goals and objectives in their companies? What are those easy first steps?
I think the easiest first step is to educate yourself about what you can do. You know, you can't do everything as a small business. Your number one limited resource is time. And you are one person with 24 hours in a day. You need sleep, you need to eat, you might have a family, you might want to do things other than just working your small business. So keeping that in mind, understanding that you're human, you're not going to be perfect. There are things that you can absolutely do. But I think giving yourself some grace and coming from it with that perspective first, because there is so much information, there are so many resources, there are so many things that you can do. And I usually tell this story. When I first got into sustainability, I was, I think, 19 years old or something like that, like 18. 19, and I was taking this development class at UC Berkeley, and it opened my mind to a whole different world I did not know existed, of the impact of my actions as a person living in the US on somebody living in sub-Saharan Africa in like the mountain region of some, you know, tiny population. And I did not have that awareness before. And once I had that understanding, I started getting so overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, what can I eat? I can't eat anything that's not going to harm someone. I can't wear clothes that's not going to harm someone. I can't breathe this air. I can't drink this water. I can't live in this home. And I was just like freaking out. And I would wake up crying sometimes. I was really overwhelmed. And I was just, you know, I'm like a very big hearted person. So I didn't want to harm other people. But the thing that has really helped me is to understand that I can do what I can do today. And to celebrate the things that you do. So it might be, and looking at your like what you like, what you want to focus on, like pick one thing first and do that. Don't try to do everything. You can't be everything to everyone, because then you're no one to no one. And so maybe you decide to take on, like maybe you produce a product, maybe you produce like a cosmetic product or something like that. Maybe you focus on moving away from plastic that can't be recycled to one that can be. Maybe you then shift to metal or glass container. Maybe you then shift to a circular economy where you're able to take those containers back. But you start like one step at a time. You're not going to just go from the non-recycled plastic to a circular economy and flip a switch and you're just there. So just take a small incremental step. Maybe it's doing recycling. Maybe it's getting automatic shut-off lights for your home or for wherever your business is. Maybe it's it can be small things. Maybe it's minimizing your waste. Maybe it's consolidating waste bins so that you're not using as many plastic bags. And maybe on the diversity and inclusion side, maybe it depends on where you are in your journey. It depends on if you as a person, this is a new topic for you totally, or if it's one that you've learned about and now want to take action about. If it's a totally new topic, I recommend first educating yourself, talking to other people that are experts in this field, reading about it, and finding one small way that you can implement into your business. Do that, then find one more way, and then find one more way. And as you work and as you're able to do that, you're first making small changes, and every change matters, but you're also giving yourself achievements and so you're not getting overwhelmed and stuck in the I'm not doing enough. You get to achieve that one goal, move on to the next one, achieve a new goal, move on to the next one. And that way you get to kind of build one achievement on top of the other, and that gets you moving down the path. And at least you're moving toward improvement. Celebrate your wins, celebrate what you've done, be honest about where you're still struggling, be willing to learn more. That's what
Those are great tips. Thanks, Melanie. Monica, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I love everything Melanie said.
She covered a lot.
Covered it. You know, I love it. I'll go back to what I said earlier, because honestly, being, you know, part of a global company, there's still so much I want to do, right? And I'm like, oh, you know, it's like, slow down, you can't do everything. So I totally understand where, you know, a smaller organization, they say, oh my gosh, there's so much to do. But I say, go back to what's your why? What are you solving for? You have to answer that question. Why am I doing this, or why are we doing this as an organization? Like, what caused us to even have this discussion? You know, so be really honest about that, and then that will again focus you. So once you know what's the gap, what's the problem you're trying to solve, then you can go in, diagnose the problem like we would anything else. Don't throw a solution at it until you clearly identify, you know, possible solutions. Then you can focus and start, and it will be more meaningful and impactful, because you, in this space from an I&D standpoint, it can be overwhelming. It can be disappointing if you don't see the results. And this is a journey. So you have to know that what you're doing will be impactful and meaningful, and that it will take time. So like Melanie said, start small, don't overwhelm yourself, but be crystal clear about your why. And if you can't answer that, do nothing.
I love that.
Yes, exactly. So a question that we had just come in, how does your focus on the intersection of diversity and inclusion and sustainability change what skill sets or experiences you're looking for in talent? Great question.
Interesting. Oh, I like this.
I do.
I think one of the main shifts, and I think this is not just for our organization, it's one that I hear when I go to different, I don't know, webinars, conferences, hear other people talk, is emotional intelligence. And this used to be kind of an out there soft skill that people were not really interested in, that is now very much front and center as very important. because the more you're able to have emotional intelligence or be emotionally intelligent, the more you're able to work within a diverse organization, and the more that you thrive in that kind of organization. And the more that you have people like that, the more that you attract more people like that. And so that just helps to bring more of that kind of high EQ, it's called EQ, emotional intelligence type of organization. And when you have spaces like that, that is a space where people are more likely to feel included, where people are more likely to feel safe and valued when they come to work, more likely to feel understood, more likely to bring up problems if there's a problem. When you're in organizations that are not valuing emotional intelligence, those are oftentimes work environments that have a culture of fear. And those cultures of fear are not ones where people are willing to speak about problems, which means that innovation is usually quite low in those kinds of organizations, which will affect your long-term success. So from my perspective, emotional intelligence is a huge one. I don't know that that's really necessarily a change, but I think it's becoming more and more important. And I think a diversity of experience is also becoming more important. I think there was a time where, you know, if you did different jobs over 10 years, that was maybe not a positive point when talking to a recruiter. Maybe the being at a place for 20 years was more the norm and more the kind of valued asset to have. And I think that we realize now that there is value in being able to thrive and succeed in diverse conditions, diverse environments. And the more that you do that, that means that you're adaptable. That means that you're able to think on your feet oftentimes. You're good at problem solving. So I think that those two particular aspects, they're not necessarily a skill set on their own, emotional intelligence is, but I think that what you have to do those, to demonstrate those, are certain skills that really just drive those two components of really emotional intelligence that helps to make more of an inclusive environment.
Great points. Monica, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll quickly just state, when we think about one of our attributes for Eaton as we assess talent, one of them is learn, like we learn. So it's about the continuous learning mindset. So I&D, sustainability, you know, how open are you to new ideas? How agile are you? Flexible, willing to try new things, or something you haven't done before? How curious are you? So it may not necessarily be that we're adding the concrete, you know, sustainable I&D, but it's saying how you approach, you know, work, life, etc. Because 5 years from now, what's next? So are you agile, open, curious, etc.? So that's what I would add.
I like that.
I like it. Great questions. So on a personal front, what are you both reading right now? What's on your nightstand at home or even in the office? Anything related to this topic or?
You know, one that I'm usually always kind of reading is Project Drawdown. I really like it. If you haven't read it, it's a book that basically goes through the top things that can not just reduce carbon emissions, but actually draw carbon down from the atmosphere, which is a very cool concept. And I would say the top 5 to 10 of those is where like the diversity comes in, are related to women and families. So the more that you support women, the more that you support families and that kind of well-being, the more you're doing things that will draw carbon down and actually improve our environment, which I think is pretty cool.
Project Drawdown, is that what you said it was?
Project Drawdown. It's Paul Hawkins. It's a really good book. It's not an easy read. It's not like a fun read. So I'll just put that out there. It's fun for me, but I won't say that it's fun for most people. But it's you can also go online and just look up the list of things You can go to Project Drawdown's website, and they have just kind of the list of things ranked with how much carbon they would draw down. And it's kind of amazing. You would think it's like electric cars or solar panels, and those things are high, but families and women, when you put those together, are by far the top thing that would matter.
So for me, I usually have a few books open, but the one I think about that came to mind, I love Brene Brown, and Dare to Lead is one of her current one of her books, and really about this notion of leaders and this courage and being strong and vulnerable. And then we talked about EQ, all of that really playing a part into leaders and really making cultural transformation. It starts with the leader and how vulnerable are they in terms of being willing to inspire others in the organization, create this sense of psychological safety, because if you aren't there, so that's one I would say. Yeah.
Love her.
That's great. Well, ladies, any final parting words before we wrap up our discussion today?
I do.
Any
I wanted
words
to
of
mention,
wisdom or
yeah, I wanted to mention one thing that came to mind, which is this anecdote that so I worked for a tech consulting firm before, and I was leading sustainability there. And one of the most interesting things that I heard while I was there is that at its root, sustainability is a change management problem. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense, but it is. And I think it's the same for diversity and inclusion when we're talking about organizations, is it's change management. And I give the idea, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, I think it's called A Bug's Life. And it's so it's about this ant population, and one goes off into the infinite unknown. But anyway, it opens with this line of ants that's all marching in a line. They're collecting food, taking it, and this leaf, you can see the shadow, it falls down, and the ants freak out. They're like, we're gonna die. What are we gonna do? They're like panicking all over, and this one ant comes out and he says, don't worry, we're gonna go around the leaf. It's gonna be okay. And I feel like this is what we're essentially doing as professionals in diversity and inclusion and sustainability. It's like there's this leaf of change that is so scary for organizations. People, we are resistant to change. We like things to just be all the time as they are. Our brains it's a struggle, it's a challenge. But it's gonna be okay. We need people to kind of help us guide and be guided, direct, and like it's okay. But the change management aspect, having that in mind, I think helps to approach the situation, understanding that people have fears, people have fear of the unknown, and having some compassion for people as we all are trying to understand this new world that we're living in and how to navigate it together. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to share. It's just, I think the compassion aspect of these spaces is so important, and meeting people where we are. So
I'm gonna totally look at that movie in a different light now. But that is a great example and analogy. Absolutely. Monica, any last thoughts?
Yeah, real quick, and again, ditto to what Melanie said. What she said, cultural transformation is what this is all about, for sure. And then I say it's a complex puzzle. I also think about this work as, look, it's a puzzle. There are many pieces to this puzzle, right? So when you think about, a 1,000-piece puzzle, and where do you start? You'll say, I want to solve this puzzle. So that goes back to what's your why. Then most of the time we start with the edges and we say, oh, those are easy, so I'll get those done. So, and then you fill in the middle. So think about it that way as well. Cultural transformation, which we all know is huge, anything. Now, how do we break this puzzle down into pieces? Okay, break it down into pieces, and then go attack it in what way you can, but know that it is a complex puzzle, so don't get overwhelmed.
I love it. Thank you. Well, ladies, thank you. We're at the end of our time here today, and everyone heard today that this is a journey. This isn't easy, it's complex, it's one step at a time, but every little change matters. And both Eaton and Tarkett as you've heard today, are true leaders in both sustainability and equity and inclusion, although they'll still tell you that they're working on their journeys. But for businesses to survive and thrive over the long term, as both Tarkett and Eaton have done, today's environment requires greater agility, innovation, resilience, and the benefits extend far beyond the balance sheet. So Melanie, Monica, thank you both for speaking with us today, sharing such great examples, laughter, excitement, passion, and such insights. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in today. Be well, do good, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.